this is the first webinar of New Year. We are beginning with our third season. So we have decided that we'll give you a quick review of what we did last year, how many people came, what kind of topics were there, and what were the discussion points. So I'll quickly run a montage, which will take you from January 2021 till December 2021. And after that, I'll do a quick round of introductions. So that was the review of the last year, and you would have seen our today's speaker there. And we are, first of all, I would like to say that we are thankful to all the speakers, those who came, and to the audience, those who have been coming and those who are today. Just to again welcome you, I'm Sudhir Pandey, and at Ahmedabad University, we believe in a different kind of education because we're a research-based university, and we believe that there should be a discussion on topics of relevance, and it should not remain within the walls of the university, but it should reach out to people out there in public. And that's how we invite deep thinkers from different walks of life, as you would have seen. and we would love to connect them and to organize the discussion, and then we also share the recording so that people can benefit from it. Okay, so thank you so much for this. And now I'll begin today's proceeding. So today we have with us Professor Ajay Shah. Professor Ajay Shah studied at IIT Bombay and USC Los Angeles. He has held positions at Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Department of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Finance and National Institute for Public Finance and Policy. He does academic and policy oriented research on India at the intersection of economics, law, and public administration. And he has written a very famous book that most of us may be familiar with. The book is In the Service of the Republic, The Art and Science of Economic Policy. And it is a great book, and we had a talk on this. So we welcome you, Professor Ajay Shah, to Ahmedabad University, and we are thankful to you for supporting conversation series and to the university.
I'm very happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much. And the person who will be in conversation with Professor Ajay Shah is Professor Moumita Roy. She earned PhD from George Mason University recently. She obtained MA in Economics from George Mason and MSc in Economics from Madras School of Economics and BSc from Presidency College, Kolkata. She had worked as a research assistant in economics and social sciences area at IIM Bangalore, and her research interests are in applied microeconomics, experimental economics, behavioral economics, and political economy. Recently, she received a doctoral dissertation research in economics grant for National Science Foundation, USA, in August 2021. Before I hand it over to Moumita to be in conversation with Ajay, I would just request all the participants to be removed and muted. You will be muted throughout the conversation, your video and audio. And you can put your questions in everybody's chat box. We'll take the questions at the end of the conversation, let's say somewhere around 5:10, and then that's how we'll address. So thank you so much for this, and I request Moumita to take it forward.
Thank you, Sudhir. Thank you for those introductions, and thank you for playing that beautiful montage. I think sort of made me a little nostalgic. Hi, Ajay. Thank you for being here. We are all very excited to have you here. And as I was saying a few minutes ago, I think this topic is very interesting. I think we couldn't have a better topic to start the third season of the conversation series with. The farm laws, since they were announced, they have been in the news for the longest time, and they were followed by the prolonged protests, and then eventually the government took a U-turn and repealed the laws. So jumping straight into the conversation, so these three farm laws, they were announced with much fanfare. So let me just read out the laws for everyone's benefit. So these three farm laws, which were introduced in September 2020, they were the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act 2020, Farmers Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act 2020, and the Essential Commodities Act 2020. So as I was saying, that these farm laws, they were announced with much fanfare. They were supposed to be the game changer for the Indian agriculture. The government said that these new laws will help strengthen the basic infrastructure of the farm sector. So my first question to you is, what was actually going wrong in the agricultural sector till then? Which aspects of the agricultural sector needed to be fixed? And secondly, in your opinion, were these bills, the right reforms for the agricultural sector?
At the outset, we should identify the large number of state interventions that are present in agriculture. The government is in the driver's seat in a numerous array of ways in the field of agriculture. There is government involvement in fertilizers. There's a fertilizer subsidy, particularly on nitrogenous fertilizers. The government is there on water. The government is there with free electricity. The government is there in the business of seeds. So there's a large number of interventions on the input side. And then on the output side, the government is there with purchase programs, the minimum support price. The government is there in storage. The Food Corporation of India holds inventory, and many state governments are there interfering with the movement of agricultural products across state boundaries. The government is there interfering with international trade. In most cases, there are barriers either to the import or the export of agricultural products. The government is there in the mandis, interfering with who can build agricultural trade operation and how people can transact in the agricultural spot market. The government is there in the futures market, mostly interfering, disrupting, banning futures trading. And finally, the government is also there in some of the new age issues like regulating genetically modified crops. So there is a very large array of interventions by the government. It's important to see this in its entirety. So each intervention is often analyzed in the small, but we should see the big picture that the government is all over the place. They are trying to be some manager of the whole thing. And oh, you look slightly beyond this, and then you have the government disrupting the working of the land market. It's difficult for people in the world of agriculture to sell land, to pledge land as collateral. The lender can't grab collateral. So the sector is just hemmed in with government intervention. I mean, if you ever wanted to see a place where the government is involved in every aspect of the life of one economy or one sector, it is agriculture. Now, this has messed up the price system. This has messed up the fundamental machine of how markets and prices work. Okay, as economists, all of us understand the glory of the price system. The price system is the mechanism of resource allocation. It is the quiet, endless way in which all of us look at prices and we reshape our demand and we reshape our supply. And the efficient allocation, the most efficient allocation, is that which is produced by the price system. In the world of agriculture, I find it very interesting to think that there are basically three decisions. Heart and soul of the entire agriculture economy, there are three decisions. Question one, what should I sow? Question two, how much capital should I put into my agricultural inputs? And question three, what should I store? So sowing and agricultural inputs and storage. These are the three decisions. All the three decisions would be made very well by the price system. So in a world of prices, what should I sow would be shaped by what will be more profitable. And I will look into the future using futures markets. I'd get a forecast of what would the price be from the futures markets, and I'd make the correct decision. Okay. How much should I invest also will be based on risk and return, and I will use the futures markets. Maybe I will remove my risk by locking in a transaction using the futures markets. And what to store, the storage decisions will be made by lots of people. And when there is a big gap between the present spot price and the present futures price, then people will buy on the spot and transport it into the future by using warehousing. All these three steps are disrupted by the government. And that is why we have a glorious mess in Indian agriculture today. So remuneration of farmers is poor, and the yields are low, and there is real plight by farmers all over India. And the explanation lies in the failures of state policy.
So could you just elaborate a little on the spot markets and the futures market that you're talking about? Like maybe a lot of the audience members do not really know about it. So could you just elaborate how that's beneficial to the farmers as opposed to the spot markets?
So I'm standing in June and I'm making a decision to put some crop into the ground, and it will be harvested at Dashera. Now, what I need is an efficient forecast of what prices will be like in Dashera. And note, it's a forecast. There's no certainties in life. Okay. So the market that produces that is the futures market. So on the futures market, there are buyers and sellers trading cotton for October delivery or trading bajra for October delivery. So all the bright people of the country are engaged in that speculative activity of buying and selling for the October delivery. And that becomes an information system. So case one, I'm a farmer. I'm not participating in the market, but I'm just using information from that market. So I could compare 5 different choices of what to sow by looking at the futures market and saying, okay, if I put in this kind of crop, I'm likely to get that kind of price standing in October. Okay, now you'll say, I'm not satisfied. Showing me an information signal is not good enough. This is too dangerous. This is too risky. Very well. The farmer can go into that future date, can go to the futures market and lock down a transaction saying, I don't care what happens to future prices. I am locked in. That I contract on that price today. So there's some 144 rupees per quintal. I contract on it today. Then I have a locked in price, no matter what happens to the spot price from here to there. So this is the glory of futures markets. And it's a telling commentary on the intellectual capacity in Indian public policy that just a month ago, the government of India banned 7 of the most active and successful futures contracts in the country.
So future markets, is it, so it's, as you're saying, they're banned. So they were not really functioning currently in the Indian agriculture sector, or?
It goes in fits and starts. Every now and then, there is some amount of development in the futures market. Then there is this very pernicious theory. It's the Indira Gandhi theory of economics, that when there is inflation, when prices go up, you blame it on the trader. So you say it is the trading on the futures market, which is the reason why prices have gone up. And so the policymaker bans the trading on the futures market. Now, this has been done innumerable times in India's history. First of all, we have ample evidence that this is not what influences the price. Okay, so as economists, we would like to preach to everybody that supply and demand make the price. That when prices go up, it's because there's a shortage. As economists, we would like to say that aggregative inflation in the country is a monetary policy phenomenon. That there can be price fluctuations from crop to crop, but the aggregate inflation of the country is a macroeconomic phenomenon. It's a monetary policy phenomenon, and it has to be dealt with by the Reserve Bank of India. It has to be controlled through inflation targeting that is done by the Reserve Bank of India. It has nothing to do with individual crops. But this kind of economics knowledge is not widely prevalent in India. So every now and then bans take place. And if I may just burden this conversation with 2 moves ahead with the kind of consequences that come. Many people, including us economists, we tend to think that markets spring out of thin air, that the government just has to permit something and suddenly all the good things start happening. Okay, so banning, unbanning is seen like an electric switch. You can switch it on, you can switch it off. This is not how economics works in the real world. In the real world, there is a very complex animal that is called organizational structure. Organizations have to emerge in the private sector, which develop knowledge, which develop processes, which develop expertise, which develop capabilities. And then their activities on these markets creates the rationality of the markets and the deep and liquid markets. So when a government has a long tradition of doing bans and interfering in the working of the market, then as a private person, you and I would think that, this is a really messy situation. Why should I bother to invest in building an organization? So those investments by private people in building organizations tend to not come about. So in fact, the futures market does not work very well, even when the government unbans it. Because the private sector is saying, why would I bother? Imagine, would you and I make a career in something where every few years the government is going to ban our livelihood? Okay, so if the government was going to periodically announce that cutting your hair is banned, then I can assure you that fewer people would take on the career track of becoming hairdressers, right? It's basic economics. So that's the mess that we have in agriculture, that for decades and decades, we have done socialism in agriculture. We believe farmers are too stupid to think for themselves. And we just have government intervention upon government of intervention upon government intervention. Well, as economists, we are the ones carrying the torch. We are the ones carrying the flame of trying to say, people are not stupid. People are very smart. People understand incentives. People understand what is in their best interest. You just let go, let people do what they want, and things are going to work a downside better than what we see in the world today.
Right, I agree with that. So, as you're saying that we need to move away from state intervention, so something that I want to talk about is the MSP, the minimum support price, which is, I guess, somewhat related, but not directly part of the farm laws. But I mean, but the battle to add MSP as a legal right to the farmers is sort of still on. So, as you're saying that the government's sorry, not the government, the farmers are not really dealing with the demand and supply and seeing, what the where the shortage is, and then producing those crops. The government MSP kind of, I suppose, gives a wrong signal to the farmers regarding which crops to grow, or rather which crops not to grow. So what are your thoughts on that? Is MSP a distortion in the decision making for agriculture? Like these, as you said, like there are three main decisions: what to sow, what to where to put the money for the inputs, and the storage part. So does MSP then become a distortion in those decision making?
Yeah. So in any market, if the government stood up and said that I stand ready to buy infinite quantity at price P, then that would be a distortion. It would interfere with the price system. Okay. So always and always, we are economists. The single glory is the price system. The price system is the everyday process of people looking at prices, looking at technology, looking at input prices and output prices, and reshaping their production process to try to do better for themselves. So my self-interest drives me to find the lowest cost combination of inputs, find the best technologies, and find the best widgets that I should be making in a way that makes money for me. That is microeconomics. Now the government standing there and saying, I will buy wheat, come what may, come hell or high water. I will be there to buy wheat at X rupees a kg. That's a distortion in the price system. People tend to often assume that MSPs are good for farmers, but upon reflection, is actually working very badly for them. And in this, I always want to hold up Punjab. Okay, Punjab is the most glorious agricultural land of India. They have beautiful irrigation thanks to the system of canals that came up after independence. They have a sophisticated, knowledgeable, educated labor force. They have larger land holdings compared to most of India, and they are able to do agricultural mechanization. Okay, they are close to Delhi. They're close to Delhi as a market, and they're close to Delhi as an international airport. It could be a terminal where goods could move out. Punjab should be the most glorious place for sophisticated, high value agriculture in the whole world. And instead, Punjab is stuck making wheat and rice. That to me is the indictment of what is wrong with the incumbent regime. That we have lulled and drugged the farmers into the low value, low grade life of growing wheat and rice because people are attracted to the stability. That stability is a curse. So I'm reminded of a great book by Alan Watts, The Wisdom of Insecurity, that we, each of us are better off facing risk, dealing with risk, confronting risk, and finding our way in an uncertain world rather than hiding in a prison and saying, here you are safe. That's the kind of box that we have put Punjab into. For everybody in this room, I want you to think about a country, Netherlands. Okay? Do you think Netherlands is a very big land area? No, it's a small, tiny country. It's a country that has somehow barely found a way to keep the sea out. They built dikes and they prevented the sea from coming in. Okay, Netherlands, not great weather. Okay, large part of the year, a very cold place like the bulk of Europe. Would you be surprised if I told you that Netherlands is either the second or the third largest agricultural exporter in the whole world? In the whole world, it depends on which year you look. They're either second in the world or third in the world. How is it done? It is done by intelligence. It is done by capital. It is done by capitalism. It is done by technology. It is done by treating agriculture as a business. And it is done without any government intervention of MSP and Essential Commodities Act and banning futures markets, and all the Indian socialism, all the Indian development economics is absent in the Netherlands. That is how a tiny country, Netherlands, is the world's second largest or third largest exporter of agricultural goods. Well, that makes me think about Punjab. I think that the genius of the people of Punjab and the beautiful weather in Punjab and the water resources in Punjab, we should set our sights higher. We can build something like the Netherlands in Punjab. Instead, which is doing the worst low grade, low intelligence uh, crops possible, that is wheat and rice. So to me, that is the highest testimony of what development economics can achieve, which is it can take the most golden land of India and convert it into growing wheat and rice.
So, as you're mentioning Netherlands and of course compare it to Punjab, so I, from what I understand, is specialization seems to be missing right now in the Indian agricultural sector. But also, my next question is that, so I assume in Netherlands it's a more capital intensive technology that's being used. So, what about India? I would expect it to be more labor intensive, right?
So in the world of agriculture, there are things that are more capital intensive and there are things that are more labor intensive. A lot of the hard work around organic farming, flowers, growing chicken and working with pigs and all that, it's all complex and labor intensive. So markets will sort these things out. And when you think of India as an exporting platform, there will be things that are done that will be relatively labor intensive in India. Again, I would like to torment everybody in this room with some facts. Okay, we sit and whine about the subsidies on milk in Europe. Okay, and it is true, there are very, very high subsidies for milk in Europe. Okay, but despite those subsidies for milk in Europe, did you know that the milk that you source in Gujarat is cheaper than the milk in Europe? That the price of making cheese in Gujarat is lower than the price of making cheese in Europe. Okay, so the opportunities are tremendous. Instead of complaining about what other people are doing, there are opportunities for us in India to make progress using our natural assets, using our strengths, and that specialization will be along the lines of using more labor intensive. So there are crops that involve hand pollinating flowers. Yeah, that's what we would do in India.
So, so coming back to the point of the MSP, as you were saying that we have this in our mind that there needs some kind of stability. They're not really into risk taking. But I mean, what are the other sources of stability to give the farmer some peace of mind? So, as you're saying that I think international trade could be one source of stability for the farmers. But how will basically the incentives of the farmers change, if they know that, international trade is encouraged without any bans or anything on specific agricultural products or something. So how will the incentives of the farmers change here?
So a couple of pieces. The first is we should recognize that a very large part of agriculture in India does not have the MSP. Okay, so the MSP applies only in some geographies on some crops. So yes, life is difficult. There is a lot of uncertainty and volatility in the world, and the government is not there as a risk manager. That is not the role of the government. And hundreds of millions of families in India face risk all the time. So we should not set ourselves a concept that somehow government is going to be some mother. That is not the job of government. The job of government is to make public goods. And you could almost think like in Article 14 that why should some tiny group of farmers in India, the people who do wheat and rice in certain geographies, get a very low risk environment when hundreds of millions of other people do not. Okay, so the people who grow tomatoes and bring them to the Ahmedabad market have no government support on prices at all. And every now and then there is a problem where there is an exuberant harvest and the price of tomatoes drops to 2 rupees per kg. Okay, this is a part of life. It's a risk that hundreds of millions of families in India are taking, and there's nobody to protect them. So let's not get into this developmentalism that government is some maibab, the government has to protect the people. I think it's a very harmful trait in India. Hundreds of millions of households in India confront risk every day. It's a part of life, and it is not the job of government to remove the risk of people. It is not the job of government to run welfare programs and support people. It is the job of government to make public goods. Okay, so that is part one. Part two, there are many, many elements through which in a market economy, these risks get managed. The first, as you said, is international trade. That when there is a glut in India, the world market is the buffer. So many private people in India would buy in India when it's cheap and transport it outside the country. Okay, So India has ample opportunity to produce and sell into the world market, and that is definitely something that should be done. So in a world of international trade, you get a floor that prices will not go below something because people, rational traders and speculators in India will buy those things in India and transport them abroad. And by the way, similarly, from a consumption point of view, you don't need to think that the prices will go to infinity, because in a world of international trade, when the price goes too high, rational traders, rational speculators will buy things abroad and bring them to India. Okay, so international trade fundamentally stabilizes agriculture. Okay, there are other ways in which stabilization can happen. I already described futures markets, that every individual has the choice of selling at a locked in price on the sowing date. So in June, I make a decision to sow something, I can sell it into a futures market, and I'm guaranteed that price at the expiration date. We can and should have private insurance companies looking at these things and innovating. So if you think of the risk structure, either my crop can fail or the price can collapse. So what the private financial sector can do, if given a chance to function, is create hybrid protection contracts for people, saying, I'll pay you in either of these two scenarios. Either you have a drought and your crop gets burnt out, or you have too much of a harvest and the price crashes. In either of these two cases, I will pay you money in return for your payment to me of an insurance premium. So these are all many, many different things that can be done. And of course, one of these methods is corporate contracting. So McDonald's buys Idaho russet potatoes in India. And the way they do it is it's a comprehensive contract that they give the seeds to the farmer and buy back the complete product. So there again, they're giving locked in contracts to the farmers. These are all the adaptations through which the price system thinks about these things and comes up with very good solutions. But I just want to put our baseline correctly. Our baseline should not be zero risk. Risk is a part of the market economy. All of us face risk, and we should not set ourselves some normative ideal that elimination of all risk is either desirable or feasible.
Right. So you're talking about international trade, but what about domestic trade, like within the country? What about that? Is that also a source of stability for our farmers? I mean, so I was glancing over this paper that you co-authored with Amrut Burman, Ilya Patnaik, and I think Shubha Roy. And I think you'll talk about this national market for food in that paper. So if you could just elaborate a little on that, like what exactly is this national market for food? How can that be achieved? And also, I'm not sure, do the farm bills address something like this in any of the bills?
So this is coming closer to the bread and butter of the farm bills. There are two classes of domestic barriers on the movement and the trading of agricultural goods in India. The first is that some states have restrictions on moving certain goods. Okay, so it's in some sense violative of constitutional protections of interstate commerce. And we argue that the union government should be using these elements of the constitution to create a pro-trade environment where goods can move freely across states. But the other is the mandi system. As economists, we are shocked when we are told that there are a class of markets in India who are called the APMCs, the mandis, and they have a monopoly on trading, which means that if you are a farmer and I come to you and I say, sell me the goods directly, then we are in violation of the law. So the coercive power of the state is being used to enforce against private voluntary transactions. Okay? So you and I are consenting adults. But if we dare to come into a voluntary arrangement with each other, the government of India will use its power to enforce and inflict violence upon us. That is the nature of the law that is present in India today. And again, this is the old development economics. The World Bank in the 50s went all around the world propagating these kinds of ideas. So we economists have a lot to answer for the development economics that keeps India poor. The farm bills envisage removing these provisions so that people will be more free to transact with each other. And I can personally consider this entirely in the right direction. There is no place to interfere in private voluntary arrangements. I mean, maybe if some government wants to run some market infrastructure on a voluntary basis, they may be free to do so. But why should they interfere in you and me doing a transaction? Why should they interfere in you and me starting a marketplace? Okay, so that is the nature of interference into uh, voluntary transactions between consenting adults. That is a feature of the present agricultural system, and it doesn't make much sense. And so I was delighted when the farm bills were seeking to move away from this arrangement.
So I know you understand. I mean, you're saying that why should the government interfere in any voluntary interactions that are happening? But I think whenever this option is given that along with the APMCs, you can transact with intermediaries or other corporates, I think this fear is there of corporate rightization. Sorry. So I think this fear is that big corporates are going to swoop in, and when they are transacting with the farmers, they will exploit the farmers. So is that fear unjustified in that case? From what you're saying, is it not that farmers will be worse off because they're interacting with these big corporations? What do you think is the situation there?
I think we often suffer from the development economics concept of infantilizing people. People are not stupid. So I don't think that if you try to go to a farmer and buy their wheat for 2 rupees a kg, I don't think they're stupid enough to sell it to you. So anybody who says it's as easy as taking candy from a baby has never tried taking candy from a baby. So people are not stupid. And if there are 5 alternative methods through which a farmer can sell produce, and if a 6th method appears, it's Pareto superior. Okay, so we are economists that enlarging a choice set is only superior. It is never worse. So I don't buy this argument at all.
But do you think I mean, what is the scene with the farmers? Do you think they have this notion in their minds? I mean, we do have a huge section of the farmers protesting against this, the laws. So
yeah, so that's what they say. And I have actually been very curious and puzzled about all the events that happened after the farm bills were announced. Okay, so I was surprised that there were protests on such a large scale against these bills. And I think it's interesting and important to look deeper and understand. A lot of the things that people say don't make a lot of sense, but we need to think more about what is going on. There is some reason that is going on here. There's some logic that is going on here. So first is I feel that these things were rushed through with too much haste. Okay, when economic policy works well in India, there is a considerable policy process that takes place. Okay, so there are academics, there are researchers, there are government committee reports. Committee reports are debated. Draft laws come out. Draft laws are debated. These things take a long time, and I think that's healthy. That a process of public discussion and debate improves the thinking of policymakers, and it also helps the messages percolate, the ideas get socialized more broadly. Whereas when something is hatched in secret and sprung upon the people all of a sudden, it just looks bad. It looks suspicious. That what are you doing that you need to smuggle this through without adequate discussion, debate, a standing committee process, an expert committee report, putting up draft bills on websites for discussion and comment? Why were you trying to do this in a hurry? So this is one part that I feel that the very process was conducive to conspiracy theories. I think liberal democracy is the best answer against conspiracy theories. So when things are hatched in secret and rushed through in the exercise of majoritarian power, there is a greater chance of conspiracy theories developing. And the government was not able to mobilize its propaganda capabilities to overcome these conspiracy theories. So that is one part of the story. The second part of the story is, once again, I want to talk about Punjab and Haryana. I think if we go back into history, the turning point for Indian agriculture was really in the 60s, where back to back, we had a whole bunch of terrible things happening. In 1962, there was a China war. In 1964, Nehru died. in 1964, 65, and 65, 66. We had two consecutive droughts. People were starving, and India had to go with a begging bowl to the United States and got food aid in the form of PL 480. Okay, this was a terrible period in Indian history. And many wise, reasonable, and sensible people mounted what may be called an emergency response. Okay, so this is really the work of C. Subramaniam and Indira Gandhi and others, that they said that, look, let's build this whole state interventionist thing to dramatically ramp up output. Okay, so in a way, they went to Punjab and Haryana and put forward a social contract. They said, we'll give you free power, we'll give you free water, we will give you subsidized or free high yielding varieties, and we'll be there to lock in and guarantee your purchase. And we just want you to mechanize and learn to use fertilizers and get the output. Okay, and all credit to them, they did it. But there is no starvation in India today. There's no threat of starvation in India today. The fear of famine is all over. So the Bengali movies that were produced in the 40s and 50s and 60s, which I'm sure you will remember from your childhood, are no longer an interesting metaphor in describing India. And that is the tribute to what was done in that period. I think that it is fair to think of the entire economy of Punjab and Haryana as having become deeply geared to that world. Okay, so Vijay Kelkar has been saying this to me for a long time, that you've built a pack of cards for Punjab and Haryana. As economists, our role is to see it in its entirety. And then don't propose taking out one card from that house of cards, because the whole house of cards will fall apart. So we should see all these agriculture interventions in their entirety. And then these three farm bills can be seen as pulling out three of the cards of a phenomenally broken system. I'm the first to say it's a phenomenally broken system. But perhaps we should be thinking about the way of life and the entire entrenched institutional and lifestyle, the apparatus that has been built up in Punjab and Haryana by families, by traders, by the infrastructure, by the trading arrangements, by the storage arrangements. There is a whole life, there's a whole lifestyle, there's a whole world that's been built around that 60s conception that we will lock in, we will lock in, we will lock in, and you will bountifully produce. If we only do these farm bills and we disrupt their life, that would not necessarily be a good thing. And again, this is an old idea in economics, that when there are 10 distortions, while we can be sure that removing all 10 distortions is a good thing, it can well be that removing one of those 10 distortions can actually make things worse. So we shouldn't assume that these three farm bills are only making things better. So for me, I felt that I was surprised when the protests against the farm bills came up, and I counted it as my learning, that I was so clueless. I had not understood that these three farm bills could be such a big disruption to the lives of people. And so I think we need more debate and discussion and consultation before making these moves. Vijay Kelkar says that the way we should think about Punjab and Haryana is in the spirit of a full structural adjustment package. That the framework should be, we will remove all the distortions, not just three. That we're not going to have a subsidy for nitrogen fertilizers and ban exports, and at the same time have these three farm bills. Okay, it's a crazy place to be. Let's graduate to the price system, and then let's have a 10-year, 20-year transition story about how we think about structural adjustment packages in many situations in economics. And that's the way we should be thinking about Punjab and Haryana. That there was a certain social contract of Indira Gandhi and C. Subramaniam with Punjab and Haryana, and they played their side of the contract, and they have put an end to the Bengali movies playing out in the Indian food economy. And today we would like to have them graduate to Netherlands, but then we should see it in its entirety and not narrowly as three farm bills.
No, I completely agree, because I believe there is some confusion between poverty, food, and the agricultural sector in India. And in our mind, we still have that notion that India is a country of food scarcity. So I think that also links with the question of international trade, right? Like, because we have this suspicion on exports as well, that because in our mind we have that there's a huge section of the population who are hungry. So if we have that, then why should we, get involved in exports or something? So
First sentence is precisely correct, that the food question is distinct from the poverty question. They're two separate problems. It is perfectly feasible that in the United States, they are the most bountiful agricultural economy in the world, and there are poor people who are hungry. These two things can happen in the same economy. And they're two separate questions. There's the poverty problem, and you want to figure out who are the 10%, 20% poorest people in India and get $1 a day to them as an anti-poverty program. And that's distinct from the food economy question. And in all probability, opening up to international trade will make elementary cereals cheaper, not costlier, because there are economies of scale in making wheat in Argentina or Canada or the United States, which are not present in India. Wheat is not something which should be done in a country like India where labor is plentiful. The size of a wheat farm should be 1 square kilometer, and each machine that operates in that farm should be $1 million. That's the way to do wheat, and that gets you to very low prices. So it can well be that opening up to internationalization is good for poor people in India because imported wheat will be cheaper.
Right. So coming to the politics of this farm laws, so from what my understanding is, these farm laws seem to be broadly in the right direction. I believe you also believe so, that they are broadly in the right direction. And I was reading that this news article which said that what Narasimha Rao's industrial policy in 1991 could have done to the manufacturing and the service sector, Modi's agricultural farm laws could have done that to agriculture. So I understand that it started off well, but there was a very poor implementation. The government definitely lost the narrative on some deep structured reforms. But what do you think the government could have done differently in this regard?
So the first is to see the problem in its entirety. It includes fertilizers, it includes water, it includes free power, it includes barriers to imports, it includes barriers to exports, it includes futures markets. Okay, so there is a whole bunch of distortions going on in agriculture, and they were narrow in their thinking. The second is that the good way to do public policy is always to start with the research process, to have expert committees, to have draft bills, to sensitize the broader community, to socialize these ideas, and to have a broader debate around them. The next is that a lot of these problems are actually at the level of state governments, they're not at the union government. So it just makes so much sense that the BJP is in power in many states. Do this in a couple of states, show that it works better. Okay, then the others will be begging to go with them. Why did it even need to be something that's done at the union government? So the bulk of the activity in fields like agriculture and health and so on can and should really be at the state level, and that's the way the Constitution of India is designed. And the BJP is a ruling party in so many states, so why even do it at the union government? And then comes the question of what I talked about, that why was it rushed through parliament? Why was it rushed through the Rajya Sabha as it was? Why was there no standing committee? Why was there this sense that we are rushing something through? Why did you need to rush it through? And it's better to do things fair and square with the full democratic legitimacy, that undertaking the democratic process earns legitimacy. Bypassing the democratic process loses legitimacy. Finally, once a lot of protests show up, it really does not work to show force against the people. I mean, using water cannons and filing FIRs against hundreds of people, that's not a very good way to proceed. It would be much better to be humble. It would be much better to be quiet, to negotiate, to discuss, to have people over for dinner, to find middle roads. That's the old Indian democratic way. Prime ministers like Vajpayee and Narasimha Rao brought people together and found middle roads. And that's what is the right way to think about a democracy, not to just slam things through.
And so the repealing of the laws, do you think that also means there's a policy fatigue? I mean, what are the lessons, policy lessons that need to be learned from this setback to the economy?
So I think the policy lessons are a checklist of many things that we talked about today, that we should recognize that there are a large number of distortions and view the problem in its entirety. we should have a democratic process of discussion, debate around drafts. We should use states as a laboratory of democracy, where there are many experiments in many states. And when these things work well in a couple of states, then the other states will queue up to say, hey, I would like to do this too. We should have a concept of structural adjustment packages to help Punjab and Haryana see their way through this transition. Because in a way, that was the social contract. They did something special in these states for the people of India when faced with the misery of the 60s.
All right. I think we are almost running out of time. So I think I'll ask my last question. So just overall, this, as we have been saying over and over again, there's these laws seem to have been in the right direction. They were for the benefit of the farmers. So how does the repeal of these farm laws impact the future of the agricultural sector? Will it mean that the growth and the productivity will suffer? What is the future?
We are back at the status quo, so nothing has changed. And I think it's good that there was this entire drama. I think that is how democracy matures, that all of us have thought more about these issues, and these kinds of conversations are very important. And I think the next generation of reformers will come back into these questions with more wisdom and will do these things better. So I'm optimistic that the net outcome out of this has been greater learning in the field of public policy. So, Derek Bock, the president of Harvard University, once said that if you think education is expensive, try ignorance sometime. So I feel that this is the costly path to knowledge.
So you don't think that there will be some cascading effect on the economy because of this?
Nothing has changed. We're back at the status quo. But I would argue that solving the policy mistakes of Indian agriculture remains very important. Finding our way out of development economics remains very important. We need to learn to think like a market economy and not like a development economy. And we need to find our way out of this mess. And I think the story should be played out one state at a time. Gujarat is the center of many remarkable things happening in agriculture. I love the stories I hear. I'm half Kutchi. I love the stories I hear from Kutch, where private people have paid their own money to fly to Israel and bring knowledge and technology back on desert farming for Kutch. And that is a capitalist approach to agriculture, and that is the right way we should go forward.
Okay, great. So I think we'll stop here. Thank you so much, Ajay. This was a very insightful talk. I think the audience definitely have a lot of questions to ask you. So I'll hand over to Subir, and Subir will take forward from here.
Thanks, Mody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I see a lot of questions coming directly to me or to the everyone chat box. So I would now like to invite people. So I would like to invite Professor Raghu Rangarajan. If you can unmute yourself and ask a question. He's the Dean Undergraduate College, Ahmedabad University.
Thanks, Sudhir. I had a question about one of the provisions in one of the acts, which stated that in case there was a dispute, farmers could not seek judicial redressal. In the sense, there was a conciliation board that had appointed by the subdivisional magistrate, who's basically a deputy collector, and there was no way of finally going to courts. There are tribunals, etc., in other sectors, income tax, etc., but in the end, you can always go to the High Court and seek redressal. What's your view on this clause?
I agree with you. I'm not an expert, but I would almost consider this unconstitutional. This is not the way in which you can think about disputes. That it's always good to have some conciliation, arbitration mechanisms through which a significant caseload can be addressed. But if a person feels aggrieved, they should always have the ability to go to full-blown judicial procedures.
Thanks.
Okay, so next I would like to invite Emil Binney. There was a question from him. So if you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, am I audible and visible to everybody?
Yeah.
Hope so. Okay, so thank you for the lecture. But my question is, sir, you had mentioned about US and Netherlands kind of agriculture. There in US, only 10% of the people are actually engaged in agriculture, while in Netherlands, it's more like 2%. And the US also provides support to their farmers. They buy the crops and they use it to produce maybe ethanol, and they use biofuel, biodiesel. Then I have heard that they even sometimes dump it into the ocean so that they can provide some kind of price stability to the farmers. And in India, we have our aggregate land holding is like 1.5 acres or something. And how do you think our poor farmers will be able to negotiate with this sixth player you are talking about? And I think if large companies, maybe even multinational companies, if they come into the play, there won't be a sixth player. There won't be even they will be the only player left in the market, because nobody would have the power to negotiate with them, or to stand up against them. And now, as Professor Rangarajan was asking before me, there is a clause that they can't even go for arbitration, and our poor farmers will be nowhere. They don't even have money enough to feed themselves. So how will they go for an arbitration against huge companies like that? So about all these things, what is your opinion? Like, if we go directly into a market economy in a country where 50% of the population still engages in agriculture, they directly all of them lose their jobs, and 1 square kilometer area of land we come directly into wheat farming. Where will all these people go? Where will they find employment? How will they feed themselves? Getting into a market economy is not, taking risk is not an option for them, because they will die just out of poverty, right?
Yeah. Many pieces of how I would like to respond. The first is that yes, the United States does have some interventions in agriculture, but when you go look closely at that, those are tiny corners of the system compared to the way we do it in India. The prime business of agriculture in the United States is shaped by the price system, that it is fluctuating prices. Prices go up and down. There is no interference against the movement of prices. The second is that you use the word negotiation. Okay, so if I read your name correctly, I think you are from Kerala. Okay, by the way, my wife is from Kerala. I've traveled extensively in Kerala. I want to tell you a story. When mobile phones first came to Kerala, it was a revolution in the fish industry. There is a man named Michael Jensen who's written a beautiful paper about this. What was happening is that a trawler would land at a certain jetty, and at that jetty, the price of fish could go to zero because there was not enough cold storage at that jetty. When mobile phones came to Kerala, 1 kilometer away from the sea, the boat would make 5 phone calls, find out where the price is highest, and then the boat would go to that correct jetty. Okay, that's the way we should think about the elimination of the APMC, that the farmers get more choice. They get to make 5 phone calls. They get to think, this person is offering me this, this person is offering me this, this person is offering me this. I will take my goods to the highest bid. In that sense, I don't want to use the word negotiation. You use the word negotiation. For me, it's very simple. I have 10 widgets to sell. I want to take them to the shop that will pay me the highest number. That's all. It's not a negotiation. It's a price. What price are you offering? I'll bring my goods to you. Okay. Third, you have an opinion that maybe a few large companies will end up dominating the entire purchase of agricultural goods in the whole country. I think that's a bit of an extremist thought. I can show you so many businesses in India where the government is not a major player. Okay, so think of the cashew business, think of the rubber business, think of the vanilla business, think of the nutmeg business. There is a large number of private people that continue to operate in all these, and these are businesses where there is no government involvement. There is a rubber board. Sorry, I take that back. But you think of the people selling nutmeg. It's a market. There are many dealers. You make a call. Whoever is going to give you the highest price, you take it there. So I think that you can paint this scenario, and I will consider it a very unlikely scenario, that somehow hundreds of thousands of firms will all vanish, and there will only be some 2 giant corporations in India who will become the sole buyers. These corporations are not big enough to run operations all over the country in order to buy up all the produce. So I would like to say that, you say, when India is such a poor country, can we graduate to the price system? I'll put it upside down. India is such a poor country because we do not allow the country to be organized around the price system. And with that, I come to your last proposition. I said that it is better to produce wheat in Argentina or Canada or the United States because the economies of scale of growing wheat are that the farm should be 1 square kilometer. What I mean there is not that land in India will readily get consolidated into 1 square kilometer land holdings, which is 100 hectares, which is 240 acres, but rather that the place for India in a world of international trade is to do highly labor intensive things. There is a lot of agriculture that is highly labor intensive. That is India's advantage. It does not make sense for India to do wheat and rice that are really very labor intensive. They are highly mechanizable. Those are low grade, low value products. If you think in terms of the entire spectrum of agricultural goods and services that can be made all over the world, the lowest value of all is wheat. Why? Because it is so mechanizable. Because really, by just putting some machines to work in Canada and Argentina and the United States and Australia, you can produce more wheat than the world knows how to eat. So that is why wheat is a low grade, low value crop. It is an embarrassment that we are trying to produce wheat. We should be doing better things. Okay. We should be growing vanilla. Look at the genius of the people in Kerala who were able to graduate into growing vanilla, where I believe the wholesale price is 40,000 rupees per kilo, where you pollinate individual flowers of the vanilla plant by hand. It's highly labor intensive. Okay. And so on. So think like a price system. What happens in a price system is that self-interested, profit-seeking individuals and firms look at the opportunities and figure out what is optimal for them. You did not need a government to tell people in Kerala that you should be growing vanilla. People figure out by themselves.
Thank you. I think Prosenjit is here and he has unmuted himself. Prosenjit, can you ask a question now?
Yes, please. I've got a couple of questions. One is that this food policy or the procurement policy and the MSP policy, all these things were somewhat of a historical development from the acute food scarcity that we had in the 1950s and 60s. Whether we can get out of that paradigm is a moot question. My second point is that pricing as a mechanism is a wonderful thing where knowledge is far better spread and much better understood by everybody. But it has not but imperfect competition, which is an anathema for the price mechanism to work properly, obviously does not work so well where the knowledge base is imperfect. If you would permit me, I would just like to add one rider, that is the issue of the land holding issue in India, about the marginal farmers, small farmers, medium farmers, and large farmers. And last but not the least is the issue of rural indebtedness. I was seeing in the recent NABARD report about the acute situation of the rural indebtedness. Perhaps some fresh light would be cast on that.
Thank you. I want to say that these problems are all interrelated, and at the foundation is the low grade, low income, low productivity world of Indian agriculture. We are trapped in the wrong equilibrium. When we are producing low grade crops, then the incentives are lacking in the entire system to solve problems. When we graduate to higher value things, the price system will have the resourcing to create many intermediaries, knowledge acquisition, and knowledge transmission. So what you see with cash crops in pockets of India where marketization has taken place is that there is actually a lot of knowledge. Knowledge spreads through the development of a more modern capitalistic agriculture, where many people have incentives to demand more out of farmers and go out to farmers, supply kits of knowledge, enter into complex agreements, and so on. So I want to think of 10 rupees per kg and 20 rupees per kg as the root cause of the problem, that as long as subscale land holdings are applied to producing at very low levels of productivity, then we are in a trap of poverty. I completely agree with you on the problem of indebtedness. Roughly speaking, what we know in household data in India is that about 30% of the population is going into debt every year, is increasing their debt every year. So about 30% of India is worsening their debt every year. About 30%, 40% of India has zero savings, and the top 30, 40% of India has savings. But I will always see this as a poverty problem, that it is the failure of our agricultural policies that has created sustained immiseration of the poor people in the world of agriculture. And we have tried this for 75 years, and I would not be enthusiastic about trying this for 75 more years, because it is these very policies that have led to sustained poverty. I think it is time for all of us to recognize that these things have failed and that we need to change course.
Thank you. I think that answers the question. Now I would like to invite Sumit to ask his question. Sumit, if you can unmute yourself and
Thank you
ask.
very much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you're perfectly.
Okay. So my question was that while looking at the politics right now, MSPs are here to stay. It doesn't seem like they are gonna go. So do you think that like it was a demand of farmers also, that do you think MSPs could have been incorporated into the laws by amendment uh, to allay the fears of farmers about exploitation? So do you think that at least that it would have been beneficial? So farmers' protest would have been over, and also the laws would have been passed, and the benefits of the law would have been passed to the farmers. So do you think the MSPs could have been incorporated? It would have been a better idea, and government missed an opportunity there.
So again, I would roughly say there are 10 big distortions in agriculture, and the farm bills were addressing two out of them. So we should not overstate the gains from these bills, because actually there are 8 other big problems, and one of them is MSP. So I would be cautious about entrenching a distortion while taking out two distortions. I feel we need to have the big picture. The big picture is the problem of not having a price system as the fundamental organizing principle for the Indian agriculture. And we should have that overall strategy of how are we going to remove all these distortions and find the political path to that.
Thank you. Now we have Darshan Desai. Darshan, if you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, my question was, you said that the entire process of bringing these bills, or rather the lack of it, the whole thing of thrusting upon the country the whims and fancies of one person, I mean, so this very act of secrecy that raises that question which the other questioner had just asked about a couple of corporates deciding, because there is a trend with this government of decisions which are induced by the corporate sector. So that is why that suspicion arises, that why do we have to, it's not just that somebody gets that whim that, okay, let's do this today and it happens. No, there is a game plan to it. Okay, and that's what arouses that suspicion. First thing. Second is, you think it will be right to straight away expose the increasing number of marginal farmers to market forces, because the land holdings are going down. The land holdings are shrinking. Most of the farmers, so many farmers are even not finding agriculture worthwhile. A lot of these youngsters, I'm a journalist in Gujarat. I know this entire Hardik Patel agitation. What was it? It was basically these are all Patels who were landed farmers. So the lands are shrinking. The land holding is shrinking. So they're trying to explore go into other means, and they are not able to achieve it. That's why that agitation. That this is that young generation which is caught between. I mean, neither here nor there. They are not in the cities nor in the rural areas. They don't want to do agriculture. So don't you think the minimum support prices and certain support mechanisms should continue, while simultaneously the government can, as you gave an example of vanilla, so simultaneously the government can actually make a concerted drive to train the farmers to adopt new practices. So it has to be simultaneous. It can't be, you just can't remove MSP instantly like that. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first, I think, I want to stick to my sentence. I said that secrecy creates space for conspiracy theories. Okay, I think that we are overstating the conspiracy theories. That is my view. that I feel a lot of the time the things happening internally may even be benign, but the process matters, and the impression of rushing something through brings out our worst fears. So I'm a great believer in the full-blown liberal democratic process. Okay, so we in India have navigated some very difficult reforms before. Okay, all of us in this room, we will remember that if in the 80s somebody said that the customs tariff duty on imports of most things would go to about 5% or about 8%, then we would have said that is impossible. We would have said there are tens of millions of industrial workers who will lose their jobs when Indian companies are not able to compete with a flood of cheap foreign imports, where a customs duty of 5% is not enough to make a difference to Indian producers. India has navigated these kind of transitions before, and the answer lies in process. There is a process of academics, of research, of discussion, of government committees, of governments putting up draft documents for discussion, putting up draft laws for discussion, of having ample presence of multiple people involved in the development of these policies from 2 points of view. One is from the viewpoint of expertise, that there should be respect for the key individuals involved in the work in a given policy area. And the second, from different political uh, uh, special interest groups who come together and say, look, we've argued about this with each other and we think this is a good middle road. And then, of course, the parliamentary process, the debate in the Lok Sabha, the debate in the Rajya Sabha, the standing committee process. These are the rhythms of democracy. These are the rhythms of democracy that we in India are used to. And I think it is penny wise, pound foolish to try to cut corners on this process, because then it creates the space for conspiracy theories. On your second class of concerns, my view is in the following pieces, that the dominant problem in India is poverty. We should not think about it that there is a man owning 1 acre. We should think that the man owning 1 acre is growing rice. The misery of having 1 acre is made 3x worse and 10x worse, because you're growing the lowest grade crop of the whole world at abysmal levels of productivity. So our story should always be growth oriented, that how do we become a modern country? How do we become a market economy? Okay, every single country that achieved prosperity has done it through working with the price system, through working through a dynamic, competitive, energetic, innovative, internationally oriented economy. And that is our pathway forward. Now, there are two elements of this that we need to think about, and I personally think that they will inevitably happen. The first is that in every dynamic economy, there will be a structural transformation of reducing the number of people directly, primarily employed in agriculture, moving out into other professions. In the CMIE household data, which I think is the best description of the Indian labor market today, there is a rich array of detailed questions that understands labor supply more deeply. And I feel we are seeing a much lower dependence on agriculture in that data as compared to some of our traditional conceptions of what is a person working on agriculture. So you got to think that at different times of the year, people are doing different things. And so how you classify a person in terms of dependence on agriculture needs to be done differently compared to the way development economists have done it in the past. And finally, in agriculture, there is no shame in being an agricultural laborer. We don't have to fetishize land ownership. Land is just like a machine. Whether one person owns 10 acres and hires 100 people, or one person owns half acre and hires one person, the point is to achieve high levels of productivity. Once again, I will take you to Tamil Nadu and Kerala, where agriculture is done using large pools of migrant labor from all over the country. The point is that they have high incomes, they lead a good life. The agricultural laborer in Kerala makes more money than a landholder in UP. So we should primarily focus on high productivity, high yield, high income pathways, and they will involve consolidation of land. They will involve fewer number of people owning land. And I would say that's perfectly okay.
Thank you. Now I would like to call Ricky for the question. If you can unmute yourself, Ricky.
Thank you. So thank you for the good session today. I've been listening to your ideas for a very long time, and today also you've touched upon the same themes as you've been saying. Everybody is talking about corporates as a negative influence nowadays because they have their own vested interest in making profits, and most people don't understand is that India as a country, the contribution of GDP from these corporates is the highest. So you have also said that we are keeping a low productive environment, which is going to be a detrimental to our agricultural industry in the long run because we cannot compete in the international market. It's not realistic. So my question to you is why not then instead of creating policies, incentivize for corporates to enter into the agricultural industry and try to show the way. You said that you try it in some states, but why not incentivize corporates to come in and do it in a highly productive way, the way they have worked in other industries, show them the way that how the agriculture should be run in India.
So my first response is I feel you don't need to incentivize people to want to make money. Okay, so the profit motive is alive and well in the eyes of millions of people. Government only needs to get out of the way. So, all that we need for prosperity in India is for the government to get out of the way and to do its job. What we need is courts that work. What we need is police that works. What we need is, sensible capabilities in international relations and military affairs and so on. So we don't need to get into incentivization. We just need to get out of the way. The reason India is poor is because the Indian state interferes in a whole bunch of things that rational, self-interested people would be doing all by themselves if the government did not interfere and tell them not to do it. The government's job is to do law and order, is to do safety, is to do public goods, and not to get involved in the working of the economy. On the second dimension, I would like to say is that it's actually not efficient for a large corporation to directly own land and do agriculture. There are too many principal agent problems in cropping the land. So to actually work close to the land requires a unit of organization that is more like a family. So, 10 acres, 100 acres, these are efficient scales at which a family will devote itself and take effort and figure out what to do. And that family needs to be surrounded by many, many corporations. So there will be corporations who will provide crop testing services, who will provide soil testing services, who will provide high yielding varieties, who will be buying outputs, who will be selling inputs. The role of corporations is to operate in the world of food, but it's not efficient for large corporations to directly own land and work the land directly because there is too much richness and subtlety and complexity that every 10 meters that you walk, the optimal strategy of what you want to do with the land changes. And that is where it becomes labor intensive. But the genius of what Indian minds can do is understand the lay of the land, that there is a hill here, the shadow of the sun comes on this part, the water flows from this part to this part. So here I will grow brinjals and here I will grow tomatoes. This is something the human does. And it's difficult for large corporations to play in that space.
Thank you so much. Supratim has raised hand for a very long time, so I would like to request Supratim now to ask his question. He's a colleague and teaches at Amrut Mody School of Management in economics area.
Yes. Yes. Hi. So am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So my question was like regarding the uncertainty we have in relation to the climate, for example. So you had said in the beginning that the decision to sow, the decision to produce is dictated by the government in India because of the large presence it has. It is not at an individual farmer. Well, it may be, but it is dictated by the policies. Now, my question is that if you are in a dynamic kind of a setting where you are actually deciding what to sow and what to produce, what will be the effect of climate change on that? Like, for example, the rainfall patterns are not as predictable as they used to be. The drought, I mean, the weather patterns are also not as foreseeable as they used to be. So your comments on that. It's more of a question that I need some comments rather than an answer.
Climate change is terrifying. India is exposed to climate change. The patterns of weather will change. Actually, here's what I worry about the most. I worry that the present population centers are organized around the present weather. Okay, when the climate changes, it will not be possible for certain districts of India to support a large population, and certain districts of India will benefit greatly. This reiterates to me the importance of the land market, that many people will need to sell land in certain districts and migrate to other places. We need to create conditions in India that are more friendly to migration so that people are able to move from one district to another. Nativism is a real threat, that if people feel uncomfortable about going and living in another state, then that is something that will be really damaging. But also, this is a reiteration of the importance of the price system. When climate change comes, many things will fluctuate. And the glory of the price system is that the price system is constantly adapting. So maybe potatoes will become cheaper, maybe tomatoes will become costlier. And what you need is the price system where the prices will adjust constantly. And we need thinking people all over the country, both in private firms and directly who are the farmers, who will be looking at the changing vector of input and output prices and re-optimizing every few years, that in this land now, with the present nature of the climate, this is the right thing that I can do.
So Veena, one of our students would like to ask a question. Veena, can you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Thank
so
you.
Good evening. So you did mention that it is not desirable for the government to think that they can eliminate risk from the agricultural sector for the farmers, because the risk is already inherent in the sector. So as a student of economics, this is me applying what you said to the theory that we learn, that is, of course, risk and like navigating through those risks is part of the competitive free market system. But isn't it also true that if there is a failure in the market, which from what I know of the agricultural sector, there is a lot of inequality in the sector. So my assumption is that a large farmer would experience risks differently than a smaller margin or other farmer. So if that is considered as a market failure, does that not warrant the government to intervene and reduce risks for?
No, inequality is not market failure. The presence of inequality is not a market failure. The presence of poverty is not a market failure. Market failure is a technical term. It's either public goods or asymmetric information or externalities or market power. There are only 4 categories that are called market failure. And inequality is not a market failure. If Vishwanathan Anand plays chess better than me, it is not a market failure. And poverty is not a market failure. Typically, poverty is because there is a government that is preventing people from doing same things.
I see. Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Veena. Moumita, if you would like to take some questions and say a few words.
I think sort of did with the questions. I think we're done with that, but thank you for those interesting questions. But I think Pallavi has raised a hand. So Pallavi, maybe you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thanks so much. This was enthralling. So when we think about the increase in productivity in the agricultural landscape and that, large number of farmers, I agree with you, like large number of farmers, should be working in their comparative advantage. Then, obviously we have to think of everything else, right? Education and other industries that develop. And I always have like this, do we want to industrialize the agricultural landscape, so to speak, or like, do we want corporations to maybe go into the agricultural areas, or like, how do we think about that? We certainly don't want migration into the urban areas. We don't want all of them to migrate, everyone to migrate.
See, across the structural transformation in countries that have become rich, you never see a large proportion of the population engaged in agriculture. So large scale transition away from agricultural labor, I'm going to use the word labor, not necessarily land ownership, into other professions is an essential part of structural transformation. I can't think of a single prosperous country where 25% of the population is engaged in agriculture. In terms of what kind of agriculture can we envision, I said some time ago that I think the opportunity in India is to do highly labor intensive stuff.
Right.
So I think that there is a world of organic farming, there is a world of doing certain complex crops. So as I said, there are two extremes in the world. There is wheat, where each machine that works a 1 square kilometer plot costs $1 million. And at the other end, there is growing vanilla, where you hand pollinate the flowers. So you need very high labor intensity in the things that would be wise in India. And the market system will discover that that's competitive advantage. In a world of international trade, India will import wheat and India will sell other things into the world market. The market system will discover what those things are. I suspect they will be pretty artisanal. Also, I mentioned the problem of agency difficulties. It's very difficult for a manager in a corporation to own 1 square kilometer and work that land optimally. The economies of scale are at about 10 to 100 acres. More than that, when you start trying to do managerialism, it doesn't work very well.
Okay, since we have 2 more minutes, can I have a follow-up on this?
Yes.
So like the way the US has worked with agriculture, like, you know, the commercialization and all this horrible food that they've been eating, like all this processed, you know, like all this GMO and pesticide-filled food, like, you know, do you see us going in that direction if we go, like, leave it to the market forces?
Yeah, it is terrifying. There may well be a middle world where things get worse before they get better, because it is in the nature of the transition of incomes and knowledge that you and I eat a lot more carefully today than we did when we were kids. So I think that that's a part of that rite of passage. But given the nature of the world market today, I feel that there are unique opportunities for artisanal organic food, and India can step into the present state of the global food system rather than the way things used to be 20 years ago.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Pallavi, for that question. And I think that's the last question we can take today. We have reached the end of our time. So thank you so much, Ajay, for sharing your insights. This was a wonderful conversation. And I think Ajay has also shared a link of his writings. I would definitely encourage everyone to read them. I have myself read them and I find them very interesting, and I have learned a lot from them. So I would definitely encourage everyone else to read them. And thank you, audience, for all those wonderful questions. Thank you, everyone. I think
it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you. I hope to come to Ahmedabad soon.
Yeah, and we would love to host you. We are waiting for that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for doing that, and thanks everybody. Please take care.